Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. Welcome to the third webinar in EAA's series of Keep Children Learning. Today's webinar is focused on the role of parents, redefining the role of parents and caregivers as learning facilitators during and after the pandemic. For those of you who are not familiar with Education Above All, I'd like to just give you a small introduction to the foundation. My name is Sabrina Hervey. I will be your moderator for today's webinar. I am a senior education specialist with the Educated Child, one of EAA's programs. Education Above All is a global foundation founded in 2012 by Her Highness Sheikh Moza bint Nasser. It is based in Doha, Qatar, and it aims to contribute to human, social, and economic development through the provision of quality education, with a particular focus on those people who are affected by poverty, conflict, and disaster. It champions the needs of children, youth, and women to empower them to become active members of their communities. EAA has a mission to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for vulnerable and marginalized people, especially in the developing world, as an enabler of human development. EAA's 4 core programs, Al-Fahura, Educated Child, Peace, and Rota, as well as its Innovations Development Directorate and the Together Project, are proud to work with global, national, regional, and local partners to implement proven and innovative interventions in education, to protect the right to education wherever it is under threat, to advocate to draw international attention to critical education issues, and to collaborate with leading global organizations to resolve education-related challenges. And it is in this light that we have been holding the series of webinars called Keep Children Learning. And we're proud to draw today's webinar draws a panel of education specialists from across EAA's partnerships and programs today to discuss the issue of redefining the role of parents and caregivers during this time. We're joined by Mrs. Manita Sarif, founder and trustee of Ektara, Mr. Dennis Mazuto, program director with Girl Child Network, Kenya, Saeed Aman, country director of Imagine One Day, and Masa Mufti, co-founder and chair of the Sambola Group for Education Development. With this, I'm going to ask our panelists to just come online really quickly so that you can get to see them. And a few housekeeping things. At any time during the webinar, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. There's Benita, Dennis, Saeed, and we will be joined by Masa as well. So at any time, you can post your questions to the chat. There is also the possibility that after all the presentations are done and we have started our question and answer discussion time, you can, if you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand in the chat function, and then we can unmute you and you can ask a question directly to one of the panelists. So thank you for joining us today. Our distinguished panelists, thank you for being here. And I'm going to ask Vinita with Ektara to go ahead, please start us off by letting us know a little bit more about the work of Ektara, as well as how you have adapted and started to engage parents during this time even more so. And if everyone else can just go ahead and mute and turn off their web.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Ryan. I start by introducing Ektara, which was founded in 2011. Next slide, please. Ektara works towards providing quality, holistic education to girls from the urban slums, where the families of daily wage earners from a migrant minority community earn less than $60 a month. We work in an extremely challenging environment in a hub of criminal activity. Because of poor availability of quality schools for girls before our intervention, almost 90% of them were not in formal schools. Deeply entrenched patriarchal mindsets condone equal access to education for girls. Located close to the railway lines, these girls are vulnerable to trafficking. Extreme poverty, alcoholism makes them susceptible to sexual violence, domestic abuse, and early marriage. We believe in equitable education, SDG 4, and in creating employment and sustained economic growth, SDG 8. Next slide, please. All our programs since our inception have been geared to creating a generation of thought leaders from first generational learners who will transform the mindsets of their communities. Our operations are broadly divided into the Iktara Learning Center and the Iktara Community Center. We aim to create an experiential environment of holistic learning by engaging the mind, body, and spirit of the student. We strive towards finding the identity and uniqueness of every child through an academic curriculum, engagement with the environment, and connections to the community she lives in. Early years from the age of 3 to 8 is when 80% of the brain develops. Therefore, our emphasis is on the Early Childhood Learning Center. Our ethos is to educate the whole child by adding music, sports, art and craft, hygiene practices, digital literacy, and teaching them persistence, problem solving, communication, and collaboration. The community center includes all our development activities. The family and other members need to be partners in the process of education. We engage and empower family members through a series of information sharing workshops, facilities for training, and generation of employment. In the light of COVID-19, we saw the need to upgrade trainings and skills among women, as most have no active earning member in the household. Next slide, please. To ensure that all students have the support for success, the best partnership is that of parents, families, educators, and the community. I am sure we are all on the same page with the outcomes that parental engagement should have on the child's development. The family and eventually the community needs to understand that education is transformative. Girls must recognize themselves as equals. Boys must be taught to deconstruct patriarchy. As a civil society organization, we need to make the parents and community a part of the change, which when effected from within and not imposed on them, will be sustainable and modify their socio-economic conditions. Next slide, please. Let me give you some examples of how we have kept the parents engaged. The pandemic has highlighted the digital divide between institutions. The lack of e-learning resources, inconsistent electricity and internet connections, inhospitable household conditions, and gender disparity put the future of our students in uncertainty. But our teachers, with the support of the modules from Education Above All, were always there for the students and the families to provide encouragement and support. All through this period, they were engaged in tele-learning processes to transform parents into active educators. The pre-primary mothers played a pivotal role in enhancing the motor and sensorial skills of the child under constant guidance of our teachers. All along, we have always shared information on good hygiene practices, nutritious foods, available health facilities, so that within the means they may lead a very dignified life. Most families would go to quack practitioners with a strong apathy to visiting free government hospitals. With constant sharing knowledge, we have been able to increase the access to better practitioners. Through classes on financial literacy, we have encouraged the opening of bank accounts for mothers. 60% of our staff are members from the community. Our young mothers are actively leading projects on data collection and entry, community kitchen, physical health monitoring, and ensuring good hygiene practices. Through the lockdown, we provided the required training and facility to mothers who are now making masks and bags and earning up to $100 a month, which gives them a position in the household. Next slide, please. We are there to ensure that all children will continue learning and the schools will open soon. 17-year-old Navreen, she excels in martial arts. Her mother suffers from tuberculosis. Her father is a daily wage earner who lost his job. With no food to eat for the family, the parents would prefer marrying her off rather than having her continue school. We provided them with daily rations, prepared meals, and all essentials, and now we have her back continuing her studies after 3 months. 10-year-old Ariba, academically very strong, got admission in one of the mainstream schools and was coping very well. Her mother was thrown out of the house and she took refuge in a shelter home. Ariba has been impacted severely by this. We got a senior mental counselor for her and are hoping to see her back soon. We continue to get reports of cases of sexual violence and children resorting to begging, and we are dealing with these so that all our children can be back in school. This pandemic has given our teachers a strong voice in the community and in education. They have worked against all adversities, done a radical switch to remote learning, and turned this into an opportunity for students and their families. The families had one phone with very poor internet services, which they did not wish to give to the child. Parents were not ready to participate in the learning, but the teachers persisted. They got the parents to work with Education Above All modules of flexible home-based learning. And after 12 weeks, almost every family was invested and saw the value of the education the child had. These modules helped our teachers to encourage conversations with families, and it deepened our engagement with the community. Activities like making a family tree, setting up mock-up restaurants involved every family from the household, from the siblings to the grandparents. The level of involvement was very high, and the parents are now the educators, ready with renewed vigor to send their children back to school. Last slide. Our learning through the years, and especially the pandemic, has reinforced our belief that the partnership between the educator and the family is critical for a successful education. Globally, 132 million girls are out of school in developing nations, and this is likely to increase post the pandemic. We need to promote gender equality and ensure social protection. I would like to end with the hope that our country may be a proud democracy where every child has equal opportunities and every parent has the same dream and hopes for a child's successful future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanita. That was very insightful, especially around the inequalities that have been brought out and really highlighted by COVID-19 and the restrictions that have been put in place. I think we have seen this across the globe, between those who have and those who have not, and the fact that education provision to those in the haves is so much easier, and so during our discussion later, I would really like us to get into a little bit on how we can help keep from broadening those inequality gaps with increased help to the parents, but also by the programming that we provide. So thank you so much for that. If I can please ask Dennis from our partner Girl Child Network to come on and tell us a little bit more about the work, or tell us about the work that Girl Child Network is doing in Kenya. Dennis? We may be having some technical difficulties with Dennis. I can't hear him. So if we could, Dennis, I think while we're trying to work out your mic issue, I'm going to go ahead and ask that we skip to Saeed from Imagine One Day.
Okay, thank you.
So Saeed, just give us 1 minute to get your slides up, please. Thank you. And then there you go. And you're ready.
My name is Said. I'm the country director for Imagine One Day, based in Ethiopia. Thank you for ESE and EA for organizing this webinar. Next slide, please. Imagine One Day has been operating in Ethiopia since 2007, and we have been operating in Ethiopia having a very holistic approach to education, in which our programs include, pre-primary to secondary education, which is age 4 to 18. And we have been approaching not only like building schools or investing on community teachers and school leadership capacity building. We have been also helping schools to become self-generating, because our goal, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal, is by 2030, all Ethiopians have access to quality education free of foreign aid. So with that principle, we have been always helping schools to generate income internally, because we support schools for 3 years. After that, they should be able to continue by themselves. So we have been very successful in that area, and we have received an award at the national level because of our innovative approach to school income generation activities. Next slide, please. Currently, we are operating in 3 regions in Ethiopia, basically focusing on remote communities, either pastoralist community or war-affected communities, or communities in high poverty. So we are currently working in Oromia and SNNPR in the southern part, and we are working also in Tigray in the northern part of the country. Next slide, please. Our partnership with EAC started in 2013 with a project called Bali Out of School Children Initiative, which ended in 2016. And we also implemented community-driven primary education, which ended in 2018. Through these 2 projects, we have enrolled 93,488 out of school children, and we have managed to retain over 90% of them. And we are in a process to start new project that is targeting to enroll 63,428 out of school children in Tigray and Oromia. Next slide, please. In terms of the impact of COVID in Ethiopia, as it impacted the world, schools in Ethiopia were closed since March 16, 2020. So because of that, 26 million children, 77% of them are in primary, are currently out of school. That is on top of 2.65 million out of school children that the country had even before COVID-19. Following that, government and non-government organizations introduced different approaches to home-based learning. But that home-based learning was challenged by one, the connectivity to internet was very low, as like 2%. And even that is with poor connectivity, like low internet connection. And only 28.5% of the households in Ethiopia have radios or TVs. So kids were not able to access lessons through radios and TVs, and low level of literacy among parents. About 80% of our people live in the rural areas, and most of them are illiterate. So about 40% of our adults are illiterate, and that number is so high in the rural area. And that also worsened, the inequality in terms of access to quality education between rural and urban children, between children with educated parents and children with parents who are not educated. Because parents who are educated has been helping their kids at home during COVID-19, but that was not the case for most of our society, probably like over 80%. So that was a problem. And children were exposed to various forms of exploitations and abuse, including like early marriage and child labor. This is one of the areas in which we had been partnering with EAC in terms of enrolling out of school children. But the number of early marriage and child labor significantly increased during COVID-19. So that is another impact of COVID-19. What is new now is the Ministry of Education just granted free promotion to next grade for all grades, even though they didn't study the second semester, except for grade 8 and 12. And for grade 8 and 12, they are planning for national examination to be happening in the next couple of weeks. And the good news is that registration just started today. in many schools. So there is expectation that the schools will be opening soon. Next slide, please. Imagine one is, a response to COVID-19 was supported by UNICEF and run for water out of Canada. What we have done was, first, we organized community outreach programs to create awareness about COVID-19 and around child protection, how to protect themselves from COVID-19, and what they need to do if they find someone infected. And we also provided in our communities with hygiene kits, including soap, masks, and sanitizers, especially for very vulnerable and poor families. And we have also created comprehensive and interactive radio lessons for primary grades, for grade 1 to 8 in 2 regions, in Tigray and Oromia. And that has been broadcasted through regional radio stations. And in many cases, even these radio stations could not reach some of our remote communities. So what we did was we provided the lesson using USB devices so that they can use with the radio to listen to it. We have also trained teachers, especially our facilitators who were working in our schools around home-based learning, psychosocial support, and socio-emotional learning. And we have also oriented parents in their role as educators. Even though we always engage parents in our projects, after COVID, we started to use parents also as supporters in terms of them becoming co-facilitators. And we provided we have built also wash infrastructures, including water, latrine, and hand washing facilities in most of the schools to make schools ready and safe for when the schools are reopening soon. Next slide, please. So in terms of parents' role during post-COVID-19, what was very clear to us was, technology alone is not enough. As you can see on the picture, Abdul Razak, who is grade 3 student in one of our school in Barrak, and Halima, his mom, were sharing their stories about, how his mom has been supporting him. He was telling us that, she became his teacher. The article that we used, if you click the sharing point that I share, you can see that he said, my mom is now my teacher. So the role of parents has been motivating the students to attend the learning through radio programs and following up and attending even the sessions with them, because the radio was interactive and the radio was asking the students and the parents questions to discuss and dialogue. So what we think should be after COVID-19 is also that this should be the new normal. This should be continued, and the parents should prepare children to go back to school mentally and provide them learning materials. And we think that creating safe learning environments should be prioritized, like disinfecting schools, properly ventilating schools, because most of the time the schools are built by the community and they don't have doors and windows. So creating that is so important. And limiting the number of students per class, because mostly our classrooms are highly overcrowded, like 60, 70 students attending in a class. But with COVID-19, that would be very challenging. So we are helping communities to look into that. Creating access to safe school wash facilities with our support and government support. A lot of communities are bringing water and simple technology hand washing facilities like Tip-Top. Locally producing and supplying face masks for their children, because they cannot afford to buy them, a face mask, but they can produce it locally. And that should be the new normal, and that's what we think is so important and expected from parents. Next slide, please. So what we learned from this period was that yes, schools have stopped tools to provide a learning continuity for our children. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Saeed. This was, for the very insightful look at what Imagine One Day is doing in Ethiopia, especially now that in response to the COVID-19 restrictions and the pandemic. And I think it's really important, some of the points that you highlighted, and I find it interesting, the idea of parents as co-facilitators in learning. And I think we can really take that forward. I would like to, during our discussion, touch a little bit more on some points that you raised around working with parents who do not have a high level of education themselves or are illiterate, in fact. And also the idea of the very important role of parents in creating a safe environment at the schools in order to enable children to go back to the school environment. So with that, I think we are going to try one more time to get Dennis from Girl Child Network on to present with him. And Dennis, if you could go ahead and turn your video on as well, unless it's not working. And let's hope this will work.
Hello. Hello.
Great, we can hear you. Wonderful, Dennis. Thank you. We'll just get to your
Good.
slides and then so Ryan, if you would, thank you.
Yes, first allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dennis Mutiso, Director of Programs working with Girl Child Network. Next slide, please. Girl Child Network is a membership organization driven by a desire to promote quality of life for girls and boys in Africa using different strategies like advocacy, research, community participation, among other strategies. And since 2005, we've been able to reach more than 3 million children and community members using our different programs. Next slide, please. Girl Child Network, in partnership with Education Above All, which is a global program of education above all, we have been implementing our right to learn, reaching the unreached. This is a program that is implemented in arid and semi-arid areas where children, particularly girls, have no access to education. And the primary objective of that program is to make sure that by the 4 years, we enroll a total of 47,000, over 47,000 out of school children, 55% of whom are girls. Currently, we are in year 2 of the phase 2 of the program, and we have managed to enroll more than 21,000 children. Next slide, please. Yeah, the question has been, within the context of COVID-19, have we been able to change our engagement with the parents? And the answer is yes, to a larger extent. Our engagement with the parents has changed, because now, in absence of the teachers, the role of teachers now has shifted to the parents. And the first thing that we did when the COVID-19 struck was to organize the parents through a Nyumba Kumi structure to sensitize them on the available government platforms and spaces that the government is using to deliver the content of learning. For instance, the government is using radios and online platforms to deliver the learning content. And so we aim to bring the parents together to sensitize them on the available spaces and platforms. And one of the strategies that we've been using is to negotiate with the parents so that they can allow their children to access their radios. Of course, not all the households have access to radios, but we've been able to cluster at least 20 households together so that children can have access to one radio for them to listen to the teaching and lessons that are being delivered by the government through the radio programs. And the role of the parent during such lessons is to be there to guide the learners and also small children so that they can be in a position to listen. Another strategy that we've been able to use is to negotiate with the parents to allow the children to access the parents' mobile phones so that they can access the online teaching and learning. Of course, when we started, there was some bit of some communities tried to resist this, or parents tried to resist that. But of course, we tried to negotiate with them and they came to appreciate that. The COVID-19 might be here for some time and it would be better for them to allow their children to access the mobile phones so that they can continue to learn. And of course, when the children are using the mobile phones, they are not left alone. The parents are there to guide and facilitate the learning processes. Again, we've also been able to, through what we call Family Matters program, our parents, some parents that we have identified, they are going through the households just to mediate the conflicts that might be there, that might hinder the children to access the mobile phones, the children to access the radios, because sometimes you find that at household level, we might have some conflict that might disrupt the learning. So through our Family Matters programs, we have parents that are mediating and resolving those conflicts so that learning can continue. And lastly, through the project, we are also using the village tracking committees, because what we said, just because the schools are not open, it doesn't mean that the parents do not continue to identify and profile out of school children ready for enrollment. So through the village tracking committees, the parents are identifying out of school children, profiling them, and just making sure that by the time the school opens in January, if we manage to flatten the COVID-19 curve, that children are ready for enrollment. And after this pandemic, of course, we don't want to let the parents abdicate their roles as teachers. We want them to continue supporting and facilitating learners, because we know that for better learning outcomes, the parents need to be there to support their children learning, not only from early years, but throughout until that time they exceed their learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I think it's really important, some of the points that you touched on around some of the challenges that you faced in engaging parents, and as well as the idea that this new role that parents are playing as learning facilitators shouldn't stop just after children go back to school, that it really needs to continue and to be effective. And hopefully we'll talk more about some of those challenges that you faced in engaging with the parents and getting them to play this new role, as well as strategies that you and the others have used to overcome those challenges. So we'll move from Kenya to Lebanon, and I'll ask Masa Mufti to please come on and tell us about the work of her organization, Sombala.
Yes, thank you, Sabrina. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. Thanks.
Okay, I'm trying to, okay. So thank you very much, Sabrina, and everyone for putting this together and choosing such a timely topic. I'll be talking my presentation about parenting in context of crisis and uncertainties, and making the call for the need to shift from a response to a pedagogy approach. Allow me first to give you a quick intro about our organization, Sumbula, founded in 2014 in Lebanon and worked in the Bekaa Valley to address the Syrian education crisis. So our mission stems from the belief that quality education is a crucial right that needs to be granted to every child, even in times of conflict and uncertainties. So we have developed our clear long-term vision while drawing our short-term plan in response to the local gaps and opportunities. And we have identified 2 key gaps and 1 key opportunity. The 2 gaps are first in quality-based and innovative educational program. Second, in the training and empowerment of teachers in such context. The key opportunity lies in the immense benefit of complementarity between non-formal education and formal education to accelerate learning and ensure school retention and bridge all these gaps. Next slide, please. I'm at slide 4 now. The next, yes, thank you. So this actually, our mission is basically reflected in our ecosystem, which revolves around 3 core programs: Tamkeen, Ta'aleem, Tadreeb. Tamkeen, which stands for in Arabic for empowerment, relates to our non-formal education that provides holistic, differentiated, and innovative learning activities that address children's and youth well-being, personal, and learning skills. Ta'aleem is the program where we provide direct support to the formal education and help enroll refugee children in mainstream schools. Tadreeb provides capacity building opportunities for refugee teachers or teachers working with refugees to help them improve their professional skills and knowledge. So since our launch in fall 2014 until late 2019, we have reached out to over 13,250 beneficiaries across all our core programs. Next slide. So why parenting? So our philosophy on parenting derives from our contextual understanding and fieldwork supported with evidence-based research. First, there's a very relevant proverb that we use in our culture, which wisely say it in simple words: those who don't possess it can't give it. فاقد الشيء لا يعطي. And it's truly the case when we understand that well-being is a highly complex matter, and that if parents, teachers don't have it, then they won't be able to give it. Neuroscience tells us that in times of crisis and under trauma, it's mostly the reptilian brain that is activated, and that part of that brain cannot learn or evolve. It switches instead to the 3 survival strategies known as flee, fight, or freeze, and which are all various forms of depression and apathy. So the question that we need to ask ourselves: how can children learn when their minds are switched to the survival mode? And how can we help them reconnect with learning when their own parents and teachers' well-beings are also affected? Next slide, please. So here I wish to refer to the American Psychologists Association, which defined 4 parenting styles: authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved. And it was quite eye-opening moment when we started to recognize during our fieldwork the 2 dominant parenting styles prevailing among the refugee communities, and that is authoritarian and uninvolved, which happen to be also the most negative ones. That led us to discover and to be inspired by positive psychology, which is very much aligned with our holistic pedagogy. So positive psychology highly focuses on the well-being by promoting children's self-esteem, self-efficacy, sense of belonging, among others. It also fosters quality relationship with parents, teachers, and peers, and helps improve school adjustment and reduces behavioral problems. And most importantly, the outcome associated with positive psychology are long-term. So how is all of that translated into our program? From day one, actually, parenting was always an integral element in the design and planning of our program. For example, in Tamkeen, we regularly conduct regular field visits, needs assessment, internal surveys with parents. We hold parents awareness sessions, consultation meetings, psychosocial support sessions, and so on. But we have also developed our own indicators and monitoring evaluation to assess children's improved well-being and school achievement, taking into account parenting factors. In Ta'aleem, for example, we act as the direct liaison between parents and public schools through a series of projects and activities to ensure that well-being of children is protected. In Tadreeb, which is the training program, parenting obviously is a core subject integrated across all disciplines in teachers' training. How does that transform itself at a more structural way? Next slide, please, Ryan. So we have developed our parenting framework based on a community development approach to enhance the role of parents, realizing that parents are our strongest ally. So we start from trust building and establishing that foundational relationship, which leads us eventually to conduct all the needs assessment and provide the appropriate support by engaging the parents and by reaching the level of empowerment where truly we have the buy-in of the parents and they start feeling well informed and coming back to us with ideas and really participating in designing and co-facilitating all these experiences for the children's learning. So next slide. So what are the programmatic takeaways? We really have a lot to share, but I'll focus on 3 key points here. Ensure well-being and parenting are integral and key elements of any educational intervention. To train and empower teachers on high complexity skills and knowledge, such as coaching, best practices for blended learning, differentiation and formative assessment, parenting, obviously, well-being, and adaptability, among others. Third, invest as soon as you can early on in tech-based solution. It has been so rewarding when we started early in 2015 by having 3 computer labs, over 75 computers running during morning and afternoon shift, 5 days, 7 days a week. So it was like really so rewarding for everyone. And STEM for Refugee program was awarded at the UN Solution Summit in 2017. The quote of our young girl Sandos was actually one of the most powerful quotes that everyone was referring to when she said, "I learned that for each problem there is an obstacle and nothing will stand in my way ever." Next slide, please. So in the context of COVID, we find that the learning lessons of COVID are quite grave and alarming, which forces us to escalate at all levels the call for a transformative pedagogy to ensure the following. We need to build a strong preventive system for better preparedness at time of crisis and uncertainties. We need to really address the equitable access to connectivity and tech-based solutions and devices to all communities, especially the most vulnerable ones. Foster parent-school partnership for better school performance and healthy development of children. Empower teachers on high complexity skills and knowledge for the new era of blended learning, and also invest in relevant and rigorous digital content. Finally, I'd like to end with the quote of John Dewey. And to really stress again that education is indeed life in itself. Late Sir Ken Robinson described it as being organic, creative, and unique. So there is no ready-made recipe for making teaching and learning transformational. There's rather a roadmap, accumulation of best practices, patterns, and evidence-based research coupled with the will to make it happen. So the question is, can we make it happen? I leave the answer for this during the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Masa. I think it was very, very insightful and helpful to draw everything together with the psychology behind positive parenting. And hopefully we can touch more on some of the strategies you've been able to use to change some of those negative coping mechanisms and parenting strategies to more positive ones as we discuss a little bit more. I'd like all of the rest of the panelists to go ahead and come back on so that we can get into our discussion now. And for those of you who are attending and listening in, if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat or raise your hand, and we can open your mic and let you pose your question as well. But I'm gonna start us off. Saeed, are you able to join us? Hopefully Saeed will be able to come on as well. So I want to just start us off with a few questions to kind of dig a little bit deeper into some of the things that you've touched on so far. And so you can just take these as you would like, but as I alluded to earlier, I'd really like you to kind of help get a little bit deeper into some of the challenges that you faced when trying to get parents to engage in their children's education, and particularly kind of change the role that they're playing and becoming that co-facilitator, learning facilitator at home. And what, in addition to those challenges, what are some of the strategies that you've been able to use to overcome those challenges? And whoever wants to jump in first can just take it away.
Should I start?
Sure.
So I think for us in ICTARA, we are working with the minority migrant community, and they're all daily wage earners. So the first thing was that there was because there was no income, so they had no savings which they could use for their food and for their daily whatever they needed. And so that was a very, very big problem for them. They just would not look at education as any priority. And they did not, even before that, before the pandemic hit, they did not really see the value of education. So, and it was very difficult to make them understand that how their involvement will bring about any meaningful change in it. They were thinking that education is the responsibility of the teachers and of the school, so they don't really need to be involved in this. Also, through the pandemic, what happened was that the mothers definitely had to work much more in their households. So it was initially a little difficult to motivate them to take out time for teaching or sitting with their children. As far as technology went, most families did not have a smartphone. They just had one normal mobile phone, which was between the whole family, and there was no access to internet. So we had to only resort to tele-learning services. There were no online services available to them. So this technological barrier had a direct implication on the constructive employment of the parents. Once the lockdown was partially lifted, some of the parents started going to work, and that even created a bigger problem because the phone that was available to them was not there any longer. Our children are all first generation learners, so none of the parents were educated, and so that was another thing on how they would engage with the parents. So some of the strategies that we considered to take care of these problems were that the first one was the loss of income and food. So we were providing weekly dry rations and prepared meals to the parents so that they didn't have to worry about the food. And we even provide them all essentials because in the middle of the pandemic, our city was devastated by the biggest cyclone we've had in 100 years. So it was really terrible because we had like uprooted trees and uprooted homes, and they were waterlogging in their homes, and they lost all their belongings. So, and that happened right in the middle of COVID. So it was really set them back a lot. In between all of this, the loss of income, loss of homes, they could not deal with educating the child. So we had to take care of all the essentials, provide them mosquito nets, maybe repair their homes, provide them bleaching powder to keep away the mosquitoes, and also provide them food. So once we did give all that support to them, it was a little easier for them to focus on their education. Another thing we did was we set up multiple levels of communication with them. So we had divided our children into groups, and the teachers were looking after the children on a daily basis. So the teachers would speak to the children, and because of the the modules that we had, the engagement with the community became much stronger. So the teachers were very proactive. They would engage with the parents on a daily basis and check on the health of the kids on every other aspect other than education as well. Sometimes if the parents are non-responsive, we had a group of community workers who are empaneled with us, and they were going out every day to the homes of the children close to them, because this is an urban slum. This is not like the rural areas, and the lockdown was so strict that they were not allowed on the streets as well. The civic authorities were really strict on the streets, but somehow these children managed to get to the homes of the children who lived close by and look into the problems where it was needed. If there was any major problem of any kind of abuse or any major health issues, it was being reported to the management, who was then looking into it. So because of this multiple level of communication, this gave a lot of confidence to the parents, and also the persistence, because we made sure that we were in touch with every single parent of all our children. So this was a very big task, but we were literally corresponding and communicating with them all the time. And also this also helped in the social issues that came up of all the domestic abuses, sexual violence, and children resorting to begging. So we were taking this up and getting many counselors on board who would help them online with their problems. So these were some of the strategies that we
Thank you for that very thorough analysis of the challenges and the that you faced in adapting to the situation, and as well as, you know, the challenges that you faced even before COVID. I think it's really important to know that some of these things are not just related to our new reality that we're living in now, and that we can learn from what we've used before to go forward. Dennis, Masa, or I think Saeed is still on. We just can't see him. Dennis, it looks like you want to talk.
Yes, as I said, when we started, there was a bit of resistance from the communities and also the parents, because they could not understand how they can be teachers, because it's something that they are not used to. But what we did, one of the strategies that we used was to use the key community gatekeepers. These are sheikhs, religious leaders, people who wield power over their communities. And so we use these key community gatekeepers to pass the message and the importance of continuous learning and the central role that the parent should play in making sure that their children continue to learn within the context of COVID-19. One of the questions that the parents kept on asking, where are we going to get materials? But again, we told them, we can use the locally available materials to support the learning of their children. So now it became the responsibility of the parents to improvise on locally available materials to support learning of their children. Again, the issue of resources. I said not all the parents have mobile phones and also radios. And so what we did was to cluster households together, so that if we have one radio in 10 households, the children from 10 households could use or can use that one radio to listen to the radio programs. The same to mobile phones. So it was a lot of negotiation, and by the time we were done, now the parents were seeing the value of sharing resources and also using the locally available materials to continue to support the learning of their children. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Saeed, Masa, would you like to add anything to those responses from Vinita and Dennis?
Sure, Sabrina. I would like to share from Lebanon, which is also a very, very complex and challenging context. So as you know, Lebanon is in a stage today of a total chaos and emergency. The problem of the Syrian refugees, and also Palestinian refugees, of course, but the magnitude of the Syrian crisis has been going for almost 10 years now. So it's protracted conflict. And so as Nita said, these issues that we're facing today are not just the result of COVID. they pre-existed in our systems. So we had issues that of inequities and dysfunction, issues that have been unresolved, and that COVID-19 came to just exacerbate them and flagrantly show all the inequities and the issues that we today find ourselves almost alone, trying to figure out and learn by doing and finding the best solutions. So in the context of Lebanon again, so we have the Syrian crisis since 2011, and then lately last year, there was this uprising and the revolution in October that started, leading to the economic collapse, and now really and then coming the COVID-19, and finally the blast that happened on August 4th. So combined all of that, what happened is that refugee communities and the most marginalized and vulnerable from the local communities are the most affected in this context, and they are the least supported. Today, there's no national strategy in this state of, I would say, apathy, just trying to figure out and digest what's happening all at once. It's the NGOs that are everyone who's working on the field level, working and finding solutions and helping people. There is a great sense of solidarity, but there is no national, combined, consistent strategy. And this is where we realize that we really have to leverage on each other, and we really have to listen more and find out what are the best practices. So in this context, when it comes to parents, what helped us in Sumbula is that we started early on in our pedagogy to consider parents as our partners, as I said in our model. So when you establish that relationship, it pays off in such situation. So we have already the buy-in of the parents. They trust us. So we have helped them to really to familiarize themselves with all these tips and practices, quick practices, as Dennis and Saeed have mentioned as well in the presentation, how to use the WhatsApp and how to use, quick solutions to support and become the facilitator of learning for their children. But also we have found out that, we're back to basics. As Benita said as well, it's about security and stability. So that brings us back to the importance of well-being. We should not, I would say, place learning and academics today at the expense of the well-being. People are traumatized, and that the most sustainable way to really affect learning is to start from the well-being of children. And today, everyone's well-being is affected. The frontliner teachers, the parents. So really having a deeper understanding of how to look at this from a comprehensive and holistic approach, while realizing that the resources are very limited. So this is where we come from, and we're still learning by doing, truly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I want to come back to this idea of really needing to support the well-being of the children, the parents, the teachers, and everyone. But I do want to make sure that Saeed has an opportunity to talk to us a little bit about the challenges that Imagine One Day has faced in increasing the engagement of parents and in the changing role of parents, as well as some of the strategies that you've used to address those challenges. Saeed, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, so when the schools closed, nationally, everybody was panicked. We had no solution at hand. So we were just looking around, what's going on. But what we have tried to do was just trying to learn from experiences out there, like Ebola cases, looking into like what they have done to continue to engage parents and continue to engage students in learning. And then we used to have nationally what we call education cluster. So a group of educators coming together and talking about what could be possible within this context. So it's out of that we at least start to develop a distance learning modality that works within our context, which is like low technology, mostly radios. And of course, there is televisions and others as well. And then the point was, okay, the radios normally in our society it will be used only by adults, and adults won't give radios to children. You know, it's a very luxury asset to have, and they don't allow kids to use. And so we had to talk to the parents and convince them, you know, that they are going to be teachers. You know, we had to really convince them that they can't, because what they have been telling us was that, how can I do that? You know, because they were not educated themselves. Their question was, I know nothing about schooling. Myself didn't went to school. How can I support? So we had to show them, you know, some lessons practically in the schools. Let's listen to this radio lesson together, and then we can show you how you can support. So because the primary school curricula is mostly in mother tongue, and that means that language is spoken by the parents as well. They do understand that, you know, what the lesson is about, and they may not able to read and write. We are not asking them for that. Mostly we are asked, maybe the lesson will be telling story. If it is maths, the story is telling maybe there were 3 birds on that tree. If 2 of them, you know, are already flew, how many birds left there? You know, they can understand. You know, so they started to understand that it is possible. So we had to first make a mind shift in terms of that they can do it. But there was a lot of resistance from parents that they cannot do it. That was the number 1 challenge. And the number 2 was, you know, mostly in the communities where we work, parents want to use child labor, you know, and even when the schools are open, you know, it's very challenging to convince parents to send their kids every day to school. Now, because the schools are closed, some parents consider that as an opportunity. And now they cannot see why we are saying that they need to continue learning. So we had worked a lot in terms of community awareness and advocacy with the community and community leaders, particularly religious leaders. And we had to also provide them some incentives. You know, for parents who are sending their kids to school, the incentives are, we provide them with hygiene kits. Let's say soaps, you know, for every household. So the purpose is 2-way. One is to give it that as an incentive. The second is to, you know, for the well-being of the students, for the health of the because they can only study when they are healthy. So that way we started to get interest from the parents, and now, you know, especially mothers are very much excited about this kind of program. For us, the learning was that even though we were saying that we enroll parents in our programs, mostly the way we engage and involve parents was in terms of their contribution for, let's say, school building, and their involvement in parent-teacher association, their involvement in terms of the school campaigns, you know, go back to schools. In terms of helping orphan and vulnerable children and so on. So it wasn't more about engaging parents in terms of them facilitating learning for their kids. I think the biggest learning for us, the biggest takeaway for us is going forward, even after COVID, I think this should be something we need to focus on so that parents will continue to support teachers. Because if we look into, you know, the time that the kids have as orange, 75% of that orange is with parents, and we are only excusing 25% of the orange. So what if we are now able to excuse 100% using the parents and the teachers as well, and helping them to also really get connected and read each other, collaborate in terms of helping the kids learning. So I think we passed that challenge now. We have learned many things that we can scale up and of course continue to learn from other best practices out there. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's so important, the fact that you didn't just start from scratch, but started to look at what worked in other situations and other crises, and took that and learned from strategies that have already been used and adapted those. So important. You've touched on a couple of things that I actually, before we open it up to a couple of the audience questions, which we have several, I would like some of the other panelists to jump in on here, because Saeed, you started to talk about the challenges of working with and some strategies you used in working with parents who are not educated themselves or have a low level of literacy or are in fact illiterate. And I know that's something that I'm sure many of our attendees are interested in, is how do you go about engaging parents as learning facilitators when they themselves are not educated or can't read the materials? So what are some of the strategies that, or additional strategies that some of the rest of you have used in helping parents to support their learning of their children when they are not sure if they can do it because they don't have a high level of education themselves?
So especially where we have teachers, continued working in the schools, which is not the case in many schools, because as soon as the government announced that the schools are closed, teachers left. I think that was very unfortunate that we lost on, tapping into, teachers to contribute, even though they are not going to school every day. They could have supported a lot, by collaborating with teachers. But we have few places where we have hired teachers. So the teachers were hired not by the government, the teachers were hired by Majmou'ah, and because we pay them salary, we have trained teachers first on how they can collaborate with parents. So one of the training is we've trained them on what we call mobile tree, which is each teacher had to call a parent. So they have their parent's mobile number. They had to call a parent and talk to the student and talk to the parents what the kids have learned during the week, and then focus on what they should learn. So the teachers will guide parents every week of how they should support, what they need to monitor, what they need to ask. That way, the parents were getting capacitated on how to support through radio program. So there is a radio program. In the picture that I showed you earlier, there is a mother and a boy. So the mother will sit with her son and listen to the radio session, and then in the radio, there is a point where the facilitator asks a question, and the facilitator will say, the student and the parents, would you please discuss on this and come back? And then after a minute, the facilitator will come back and ask them a question. So the parent is not educated, cannot read the book. Sometimes the radio lesson will refer them to X page on their mathematics book or on their environmental science book. The student can do that. But the role of the teacher is to make sure that they are motivated, they are doing what the facilitator is saying, and some of them, especially in the lower grades, are something that the parents could understand. It could be stories, it could be numbers, it could be about selling and buying stuff. They do understand, but they cannot read and write. So they can help with ideas. So that's how we have been using, and we have scripts every week for the teacher. The teacher will go through that script, talking to the parents and talking to the students, and the teachers get accustomed. The students, the teachers, and parents start to get accustomed to it. And now I think in these communities, the parents can continue as far as they have support from teachers, and as far as they have that kind of radio lessons. I think that's, you know, even internally within Imagine One Day, we were saying that is not possible. That could not be possible, you know, because the way we were thinking is that they themselves are illiterate. How can they help? So we tried as a matter of like, let's try it, and I think we found out that it works, but it do require having facilitators on the ground, which was missing in most of our schools.
I would like to hear about some of the experience from Girl Child Network and Ektara and Sambola in this as well. Dennis, Benita, Masa, have you had similar experiences, or have you used other strategies? It was very helpful, Saeed, to hear how Imagine One Day has addressed this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sabrina. I can share with you, I mean, starting with the as you said, the negative coping mechanism. I mean, speaking of early marriage as well and women's empowerment, it's proven by research, and we've seen it happening, that the more vulnerable and illiterate mothers, when they are more engaged in the education processes of their children, the higher chances their children will stay in schools and reach educational attainment and commit to education. So the effect of really partnering and empowering parents is absolutely key and instrumental in providing a holistic and comprehensive and sustainable education. So again, COVID-19 has basically revealed the importance of these key issues, I would say gaps and opportunities. So parenting is not nice to have, it's not a luxury, it's a key component of a holistic and sustainable education. And the earlier we start by investing in these relationships with the parents, the higher chances we have to really reach our goals and successfully. So I would say the strategies, as I said, is start building the relationship and really help them from the beginning understand, as also Saeed said, understand the correlation between learning and the well-being. To start with, a family is the place where children should be feeling safe and able to learn. So first, to focus on the environment and the emotional stability is very important. So working on this and then presenting next step, all the practical tips and going on, you know, addressing logistical and coordination between parents and teachers. This is where really it's learning by doing. In some contexts, you have TV and radio programs. Other, we have connected hubs or off connectivity solutions. For example, in Amman, I work with Learning Equality, and basically they work in remote areas and refugee camps where they provide EdTech solution that doesn't require connectivity, so just with a server. So and it's so important for these parents because they don't have access to connectivity. So you have the technological solution, but you need all the other factors to be in, to bring them in and make it happen. So here I would like to really focus a little bit more about technology. Also, one thing that have been really flagrantly revealed due to COVID-19 is the huge inequities at the digital divide between our societies. And there's no way we can think that post-COVID-19 will be back to the old normal. So the new normal will definitely engage some kind of a hybrid approach between tech-based and physical activity. So speaking of tech, and how can we really address all these inequities? I would say that there are many issues that we need to address. Maybe we don't have the time here to go into depth about, but then really to realize that it's not only a question of connectivity, it's a question of also devices, it's a question of training and literacy from teachers and so on, and it's a question of also of content and digital content. So in for example, Sumbula was able recently to contribute in a course with Harvard Graduate School in collaboration with the Queen Rania Teacher Academy to develop an online course addressed for Arabic-speaking teachers called the new Reimagining Teaching and Learning in Time of Uncertainties. and in the era of blended learning. So it's that kind of complex, as I said, complex skills that we need to address, leveraging on the available solution that we have. So the tech-based solutions are extremely important, and they require a multi-sectoral approach. It's not only the national government that today can handle it all on its own, nor is it the civil society on its own. We could do so much with also private sector. It's a very multi-sectoral approach. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it is very important what you pointed out, that the COVID-19 has really brought out many of the inequities and inequalities and the divide that there is, that already existed. And again, like I said earlier, it has in many ways exacerbated that gap. I do want to hear from Girl Child Network and Ektara about how you've approached this issue of low literacy, and also some of the questions that Masa raised around well-being and the digital divide. I know that in some of the communities where our partners work, and we addressed this in our first webinar, there just is not the opportunity to have connectivity. There's either because of the income divide or because of the availability of service in some of these places, or the lack of availability. They may not even have electricity. Sometimes a high-tech solution may not be the best option for some of the communities where we work. But again, coming back to how we've engaged with the parents, and especially parents who maybe don't have access to certain technologies, don't know how to use it, or have a learning gap. How have you at Ektara and at Girl Child Network, Dennis, addressed some of these challenges? I saw Dennis vigorously nodding his head as Saeed and Masa were talking. So I would love to hear from him, but I think he may have just dropped off. So Vanita, please jump in.
So basically, the community we are working with are all first generational learners. So all our parents, practically all the parents are illiterate, and we really have this problem. And when we started off, we just couldn't imagine that, we will reach a situation where all the parents are so engaged with the children. So how we started was, as the other organizations have also mentioned, that the teachers were carrying the information and helping the communities to grow. And very fortunately, all the modules that we got from EAA were very helpful in this, because they were very creative and they had like a lot of learning games. And because of all this creativity and the learning games, the parents were willing to get engaged with it. So the teachers were basically training the parents to take this on. And there were things like, like making the restaurants, for example, and the grandmothers were giving their recipes. So the children were writing it down and the grandmothers were engaged. Then there was the use of plastic. So the siblings were involved in what are the ways we can avoid using plastic and use other material. The pre-primary kids were studying with shapes. So the mother would take out plates and glasses and hexagonal things to see whatever locally she had in the house with which she could teach the shape to the children. So this was kind of bringing out the creativity in the parents, and it became like a game which the whole family was playing. And this also helped in a great bonding and a great relationship building between the parent and the child. Before COVID, we've seen that there was a lot of disconnect between the parents and the children. Definitely the fathers, and even in many cases the mothers. But this has been a great opportunity where the parents have developed a relationship with the child, and now they do value, they do understand that what they have gone through, what is the education they have gone through, and how this is invaluable for the future of the children. As Masa mentioned, the problem of early child marriage and the problem of the vulnerable mothers. So the mothers themselves have started believing that if the child is educated and if her daughter becomes employable, she will probably be able to raise her family better. So earlier it was all about the child getting married and doing the household work. So as soon as the child became age of doing household chores, she was taken away from her education, and that was the end of her education. But now we believe, and we want to believe, that maybe things will change, and the mothers themselves will come up with options of why the child needs to undergo education. Another thing that has happened is, that the mothers in the community and the parents in the community have joined hands in this, because they've all been undergoing the same modules of education. So in a way, they've been standing by each other. So if we talk about even domestic violence or sexual abuse, if there is something happening in one household, the other families are getting together to solve that problem. They do not want the problems to go to the civic authorities. They want to solve it within themselves. So in a way, the bonding between parents, the bonding between families, and all these things have come up because they don't even know that the world is under the same pandemic. They feel that for the first time in their lives, the entire community and all of them living there have the same grievances and the same problems. So as a result, they've all come together. They've come together to the children. So I think it has been an opportunity in many ways as well. And of course, our teachers have been instrumental in passing on the education to the children.
Great. Wow. Thank you so much for that. Dennis, quickly, do you have anything additional that you would like to add to this? And then I do want to get to a couple audience questions.
Yes, actually, there is a research that has been done here in Kenya that shows that since the school were closed down, prevalence of child early pregnancies have gone up by 15%. So that shows the role of teachers, the importance of teachers, the role that they play. Now it shows that the parents have left all the burden of being the disciplinarian, being the teachers to the teacher. So now, of course, the issues of engaging with the parents that are illiterate, I think it's a global phenomenon. We have the same here in Kenya, because not all the parents that are learned, or not all the parents that are literate. But how we overcame that challenge is by making sure that we cluster the households into 20 or 10 and get somebody who is literate enough to guide the children through the learning processes. And again, actually, I can say the COVID-19 came up with its own blessings, because there before, we used to think that learning takes place within the confines of classrooms or within schools. But right now, children are learning with the young grandmothers, with the young grandfathers, with other siblings, and they are learning under trees, and they have a lot of contact times with their parents, with their siblings, and they are sharing. And that way, they get motivated to learn. So learning is not only learning in school. It can only take place outside the classrooms, outside the school, and it does not necessarily need to be delivered by a trained person. I will give you an example. In one of the community where we are working, we have old wazees or elderly who are training or sensitizing the children about the patterns, the weather patterns, the sign that they should look for. We are used to the conventional weather patterns, the sign to look for, but we are using the elderly to pass that knowledge, the indigenous knowledge. And through that, you find that children are also learning. So we have shifted the learning from classroom, from the schools to outside.
Thank you, Said. I think it's so important what you just touched on, that learning does not only take place within the confines of the four walls of a school. It's something that I feel like EAC's partners really hold dear, is that idea that learning can take place anywhere, and that it can be facilitated by a multitude of different people. And I really like the way that the elders are being, and the knowledge of the elders and indigenous knowledge is being incorporated into this learning and is being valued. So I do want to get a couple of questions that the attendees have posed. So we have a question from Tariq, and he wants to know, what do parents say about their quote unquote new roles in the provision of education to their children? And has there been any research to give voice in the programs presented? Or to give them voice, I'm sorry, in the programs presented? And if so, what are the main findings? So again, I guess whoever wants to jump in, but the main question is we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are the reactions that you're getting from parents about this new role that they're playing, this increased role that they're playing? And has any research, I think Dennis talked a little bit about some research that's been done, but have any of the rest of you seen any research on this, and what are those findings?
Can I come up first?
Yes, please.
In our community, we have noticed that now the parents are feeling more confident in supporting their children, and we do realize that if the parents are supporting their kids, there'll be better attendance and more better achievement of the children. But at the same time, the parents have lost their jobs. Okay, so we need to ensure that we have to kind of find the perfect balance between the parent teaching the child and the conducive environment at home. So there has to be a way by which we need to understand that how will the teaching be done and not impact the timing, keeping in mind that the parent has to go to work. So this kind of a balance needs to be worked out by the organizations like us to see that only then it will be sustainable, because if they cannot work, then they will not be able to teach the child. Another thing we have noticed is that the parents always have some important information of the child to give to the teacher, which the teacher doesn't know about the child. So this information, when it is shared with the child, it helps the teacher understand the child better, and the child gets more support from the teachers. So this kind of bringing all perspectives on the table from what the parent knows about the child and what the teacher needs to do for the child is very important. When we put these together, we are kind of bridging the gap and giving a better education to the children. So this is the new role of the parent in the new challenging world, that they need to be more, the teachers also need to be more approachable. The teachers need to have an environment where the parent can come and talk to them and not make it very as if they are, right now what is happening is that the parents are feeling intimidated by the teachers in the schools. That has to go. The teacher must be able to make a situation where the parent can come and talk to her, and at the same time, the combined information that they will share will be for the well-being of the child. So that is a role which the parent has to take on.
Thank you so much. And maybe we can get a response from the rest of you on the same question a little bit later, but I do want to go ahead and allow, I'm sorry if I mess up your name, but Osai, who has her hand up or his hand up, to go ahead and pose the question, their question. Ryan, if we could unmute our attendee with the question.
They are unmuted, and their microphone is green, so they just need to speak up.
Okay. And so maybe they're having some problems with their mic. So if the rest of you want to jump in on this reaction, or we can go to Omar Limu has a question about how the global community can support the transition of education systems into a more digital platform. Masa, I know you talked a lot about the need for the increase of technology. Do you want to address this? Is there a role that the rest of us can play in transforming this the education systems into this mixed method, because we know it can't be all digital and it can't be all in person going forward, and even in places where digital may not be the right term, because in some places we don't have access to that digital digital technology, but we can't, we're going to have to learn to have a mix of distance learning as well as in-person learning. And so what role can the global community play in supporting this transformation of education systems from all physical to some type of mix?
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina. Obviously, everyone has a role in this new paradigm shift in education provision. And I would think, as I said, it requires a multi-sectoral approach. It's a systemic issue, so definitely the national governments, the ministries are implicated in this, but we really realize that it's also the academics, university, educators, fieldwork, sociologists. So my concern is today, in light of the COVID-19 and the magnitude and this of its direct effects on education, that there is a school of thoughts. There's one school of thought that really focuses mostly on making up for the learning loss, and as if just it's a question of learning loss for a couple of, or for almost a year, and that we're going back to normal. And that's a little bit kind of, you know, scary for me, because as we said, these issues, deep issues that we have in our system pre-existed before COVID-19. So it's actually a wake-up call for us not to go back to the old normal. So it's not a question of just making up for the educational loss, right? So it's about really finding the best way now that we have realized flagrantly the effect of this pandemic, all of us. It should have brought us, bring us all together to make this happen in our respective communities. So there's this new school of thought that's really focusing on just making up for the educational loss, or academic, I would say. And there is the second one that is really more transformational, progressive, and it's initiated by academics, sociologists, educators, professors. And so we really need to find here a balance. And as I said, when we are in the middle of the crisis, there's a lot of things that we get to learn by doing. So we have to record all these best practices. It's not only theory. We're not gonna implant a theory or a solution that does not fit our context. So combining contextual learning and best practices with the best. So that's why everyone is implicated and everyone has a role.
Thank you so much. The learning by doing and combining those best practices are very, very important, I think. I do want to recognize that we are a little bit over time. So I want to thank our attendees for participating. I would like, for those of you who need to drop off, I do want to let you know that each one of our panelists has provided some brochures and some additional information about the work that they're doing, and that will be available on our website. The link was shared with you, and this webinar has also been recorded, and it will be up on the website probably in the next day or so. I do want to go ahead and ask each of our panelists, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insights, and if you have any closing remarks or any additional insights that you would like to on any of the topics that we've touched on today, or on something else, if you just quickly want to, you know, add some closing thoughts. And I want to go ahead and start with Vanita, please, and then Saeed and Dennis. I think Masa, you've really helped like frame all of this in what you were just giving to us and saying. Thank you.
I just want to say that I think this is the first time in our lifetime that the entire world is going through the same severe crisis. And I think that at this time, we should all work together to create a generation of educated young girls who will be nurtured by their parents and who will be the change makers for their community.
I think COVID-19 gave us at least two very important lessons for educators and for people working in education system. That is the key role that parents play. I think we should underestimate the parents' role of facilitating learning even beyond COVID-19, because we have already seen parents becoming champions and being proud of what they are doing, and many research evidences show that that has impact on learning outcomes. And the second thing is technology. I think developing countries, the governments need to look into investing more into digitizing, because just today we had a call with Ministry of Education, and they were presenting their 10-year plan. And one of their key focus area was to digitalize the school system over the next 5 years, for focusing on secondary education and then primary education. I think that is a huge opportunity that COVID-19 brought to the world, and even for our work to reach hard to reach children, like out of school children. That is going to be a big opportunity that we can tap into. So the investment on connectivity and need to be significantly enhanced. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Dennis, any closing thoughts?
Yes, I think COVID-19 has presented us with an opportunity window where we have also learned that the parents can also play their roles as facilitators of learning. And this one should never stop, even after post-COVID-19, because we never know what is ahead of us. So we need to continue to encourage and to inoculate that culture of making the parents play a central role in learning processes of their children. And the global community has a role to play this. Secondly, I would like to speak about technology. When COVID-19 struck, we had tug of war between two extremes here in Kenya. We had the parents who are well-resourced, who could afford telephones, who could afford radios. For those parents, they were saying that learning should continue. But you find that we had parents who are not well-resourced. They don't have the telephone, they don't have the radios. So sometimes, if we are not careful, technology can perpetuate inequality. So it's a tricky balance that we need to find how to balance it. Thank you very much.
Sabrina, can I say one more thing to add to Saeed? He mentioned two key points as a takeaway from COVID-19. I would also add the empowerment of teachers and redefining the role of teachers, who are the frontliner, really, who prove to be frontliners. So we need redefine the role and empower teachers on these high complexity skills that we need for the post-COVID-19.
Thank you, Masa. That is actually a wonderful segue for me to say that the next webinar in this series is actually on the role of teachers, and that will be taking place next month. So hopefully everyone will look out for that webinar, because we will be drawing again on a panel of partners that are implementing in the field to learn from them on the new defined role of teachers. Thank you for that wonderful opening for me to let everyone know about the next webinar. And with that, we are well over time, so I'm going to have to thank you once again for your time, for the work that you're doing on the ground, and for really helping us build the new knowledge base and redefine the role of parents in education. And as a one of the big takeaways from this that I have is that we can't go back to the old way of doing things, that we really must keep this new defined way of working with parents and the engagement of parents in children's educations and the collaboration between teachers and the education system and the parents going forward. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Sabrina.